Hi everyone, thank you for joining me for another video. Today we're going to be talking all about my favorite type of underpainting, ebauche. So we're going to be talking about what an ebauche is, how I use it, and why I use it, and you're going to see my whole process from start to finish. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into it. So to get started, I want to go over my palette because I have my full palette out right now. As you can see, mine is just a couple colors, and for the most part, the only reason I have all of these colors out is because they are left over from a previous painting session, but I'm leaving them on because they are fresh paint and maybe I'll need them, maybe I won't, but we'll find out as we go. So you'll see here I have two whites. This is actually something I've been experimenting with lately. It's lead white with ground glass mixed in. It's an RGH oil paint. I'll leave a link below in the description to it. I won't be using this today. It's just something that I have on my palette for when I'm doing alla primas or final passes on things, but I won't use it in an underpainting. This is my regular Cremnitz white from Michael Harding, so that's what I will be using today for this ebauche. Then this would be Cad Yellow Lemon. I don't have it on my palette today and I don't think I'll need it. I have Cad Orange, Yellow Ochre, Cad Red Light, Raw Sienna, Burnt Sienna, Alizarin Crimson, Magenta, Ultramarine Blue is in the shadow right here, and Viridian would be right next to it, but again, I don't think I'm going to need it, so it was dried out, so I didn't put it back on my palette. Raw Umber, Burnt Umber, and Ivory Black. Before I can even get started on the ebauche, there are some drawing moments I lost when I transferred this drawing to the panel, so I'm going to real quick go in and fix some things. It isn't perfect, and I'll make sure to go in and make more careful corrections with white chalk once the ebauche is dry, but I'm just going to make these couple of little corrections so that I don't end up going wildly off base in my ebauche layer. The goal of an ebauche is to cover the white of the canvas with a general color for each part of the painting. So I'm going to lay down the background colors first before tackling the objects because they take up the most amount of surface area, and it's the lowest pressure place to start, which for a painting that I'm going to spend a lot of time on is kind of nice to just start in a low pressure area. I also want to get my darker shadows in very early. This helps set my value range and it helps keep things organized. When I first started doing ebauches, I really thought I could just slap paint down really thin and it didn't really matter other than it being kind of a close color. And since then I've really tried to be more organized about them and more careful, and it's really helped when I do the final pass. I don't want to paint on anything, or I don't want to paint on top of anything that is too careless or just so vague that it's not helpful for that next layer. As I go about each object, I'm trying to keep in mind how the objects are relating to each other. Because the paint is transparent, I know I won't get the value exactly correct, but I still want my wooden sewing box to be the darkest object in relation to the spools of thread, the scissors, and the piece of paper. And I want the background to be lighter than the shadow side of the box as well. So again, these values are not completely accurate, but I want to keep the relationships of everything similar to what they will be in the final pass, so it's at least in the ballpark. To discuss materials for a moment, I'm using mainly synthetic brushes or brushes that have seen better days. That is because I want to save my nicer brushes for the next layer, and much of the ebauche involves kind of scrubbing into my surface a bit to really get the paint into the weave of the canvas, and that action would destroy my nice rosemary brushes, so those are saved for later on in the painting process. I'm also using a paper towel and a tiny bit of Gamsol. Earlier in the video you might have noticed that squeeze bottle with the red cap, and that is what I store my Gamsol in. I don't enjoy using solvents in my home, so I use as little as possible by just squeezing out a tiny bit into my paint mixture as needed. To be honest, you can do an ebauche without solvent, and I think it's more pleasant to paint on top of if you do remove the solvent. But that being said, if you must use it, keep it to a minimum unless you're painting in a well-ventilated area. You'll notice as I go about this, I'm taking it somewhat slow. I think in total I spent about 2.5 hours on this underpainting. While I don't want to be so precious with my underpainting that I feel nervous to paint on top of it, I do want to be intentional about it and not just scrub paint around willy-nilly. This particular still life is a bit unique for me in that I don't often paint things that are so geometric and sharp, so I'm taking extra time to ensure that I maintain my drawing, or at the very least making sure that I can see my transfer lines through my paint layer so that I can reference them in the future stages of this painting. So another thing that's important to note here is I'm trying to keep the paint especially thin in the shadows, and I'm allowing for a bit thicker paint in the highlights. This relates to how I'll be handling the final layer of paint. That being said, if any of this gets too thick, I will make sure to scrape it down before the paint dries, or once it's fully dried with some oil, because any impastos done in this layer will show through in the second pass. If you have a tendency to paint really thick, maybe that won't be as much of an issue, but for me it's definitely something I have to think about, that paint textures left in the ébauche layer or in the underpainting layer definitely have the chance of showing through in the final layer. One thing I should mention here is that I'm doing this ébauche before I've done my color study. If If I were to have done my color study first, I would probably get slightly more accurate colors because I would have already had the time to practice and mix up those correct colors. But one thing that was recommended to me by my still life teacher, Devin Cecil Wishing, was that if you're a bit pressed for time, then doing your underpainting first means it will have time to dry while you do your color study. In this case, time is the only reason I've chosen to do it in this order. Otherwise, I would generally always recommend doing a color study first. Now, where an ébauche and a color study are different is that a color study should be a really opaque layer of paint where you are trying to accurately capture the color and value as it will look in the final. Because an ébauche is transparent and washy, it's not going to be accurate as it will be in the final, so it's really just meant to be an approximate. So that's something to keep in mind. Ébauche is kind of your area where you can make mistakes or you can have things not be that perfect because you're just trying to get an approximate color of your object so that in the final layer you have that to relate through, and if you really need to, it can show through in certain areas a little bit. What makes an ébauche different from other underpaintings is that it is a thin wash of approximate color. Other underpainting options include doing a dead color underpainting, in which you would restrict use of your more chromatic colors and have a more muted / neutral version of your painting. Another type of underpainting is a grisaille, in which you would work with raw umber or Van Dyke brown and white and only try to capture the value of your subject matter and not think about color at all. All of these have their strengths and weaknesses. I think my favorite is an ébauche, but I will be honest in that I don't notice a huge difference in the final painting no matter which I use, since when I get to the final pass, my methods and thoughts are the same no matter the underpainting. Another thing I generally keep in mind when doing my ébauche is that I would rather be on the slightly too warm side, or to be specific, too red or orange side for things like wood, gold, or even just shadows in general, because to sell the illusion I would rather there be a sense of warm glow coming from those things, and if my underpainting shows through in the final layer and it's too warm, then that helps with the illusion that I'm going for. Now there's other things, this is object to object dependent, so it's not a hard and fast rule, but for example, those are the type of objects where I kind of look for, if I'm to exaggerate a characteristic of this, would I rather it be too warm, too red, or too cool, maybe too, more on the gray side, and that's how I can kind of make my judgments. But the ébauche is kind of the area where you can exaggerate or push things a little bit further than you will in the final layer. The last technical thing you can keep in mind for an ébauche is edge quality. Don't be afraid of using things like sharpness or softness of edges to your advantage, even in this layer. Even though it's a low pressure situation relative to the process of making a painting as a whole, it doesn't mean we don't want it to look like our subject matter, and edges are a great way to do that, even in this very early painting stage. Last object I'm putting in is this slip of paper. I saved it for last because it was the object that was the closest to the color of the canvas, so it would need the least amount of effort to paint. The thing I want to note about this slip of paper is that I actually used the ébauche layer to make a decision about how to handle it. So there are little typed words that are incredibly small on this slip of paper, and I couldn't decide if I wanted to make those words eligible or not. In this layer I decided it would be more effective to just hint at those words, since I didn't like how it looked when you could read them through the ébauche layer. So I went in with slightly thicker paint to obscure them more. I'm also leaving the brown kind of aged spots out to the later stage as well, since I'm unsure if that's a feature I want to include or not. So that's just another example of how the ébauche can be used to make decisions about your final layer, and again, you're going to cover up this layer completely. So if you don't like your initial decision, or if, say, I decided I wanted to go back and make the letters eligible, I absolutely can at any stage, because, you can always cover up paint with paint. As we start wrapping up, I want to address the most basic question, which is why even do an underpainting? The first reason for me is I do think it's more pleasant to paint on top of paint. The second reason is that I did some one-pass paintings at GCA, and after they were done and dry, I would notice little holes in my paint where the canvas was showing through, because I just simply wasn't using enough paint. So I still have a tendency to paint pretty thin, and an underpainting completely solves that problem for me. I want to go ahead and just take a close-up of the ébauche layer for you guys so you can really get a feel for just how thin it is. And while I'm at it, another thing I'll recommend is if you're really struggling with glare, you can just take a soft fan brush and lightly brush the surface to just knock that glare down. That's just a tip I want to recommend if you find you're struggling with things like that in your paintings. It can even be used in final layers just a bit more carefully. But all in all, that is how I tackle an ébauche. So maybe in future I'll do videos on the other underpainting methods, but for now, this is what I do and what I recommend. I hope that video was helpful for you guys. Like I said, this is my favorite type of underpainting method, but it's not the only one that's out there. So if you'd be interested in seeing more videos on different underpainting types, do please let me know in the comments. And if you're interested in seeing more, go ahead and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.